Alright, so in this video we're talking about completing the square, which is just a simple way of rewriting quadratic expressions. You might have seen completing the square before and been intimidated by it, but really if you break it down into steps like I'm about to do, it takes a lot of the guesswork out. So just pay attention to the steps and take it slow, and you'll be alright. So completing the square it's just a process that allows us to rewrite a quadratic expression that's in a trinomial format into the square of a binomial. To do this, we need to break it down into several steps. First off, we want to get x squared plus bx by itself. That's our first step. Here, b is any number. It could be positive, negative, fraction, decimal, or zero. It doesn't really matter, but it is a number. And then once we get x squared plus bx by itself, we need to figure out what is b. Again, it's just going to be a number, so we need to identify what that number is. Once we know what that number is, we're going to divide this number by 2. So b divided by 2. This is a very important step, so I want to put a star next to it. It's going to help us in the end. You'll see in just a few minutes. And then finally, we want to take b divided by 2 and square it. Okay? This is the number c. We call it the number c that makes a perfect square trinomial. Okay? And what we're going to do with this b divided by 2 squared, which I'm going to call c from now on, is we're going to add it to both sides. Because what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Once you find that number c in step 4, then what we're going to do is use that perfect square trinomial that we created and factor it into the square of a binomial. So our factoring pattern that we're going to use is going to be x plus b divided by 2, quantity squared. Well, b divided by 2 was just simply the number that I found in step 3. So as soon as I know that number, I'm going to be able to factor. Okay? So let's try an example. In this first example, we're just trying to create that perfect square trinomial. Okay, so I'm actually going to go all the way through the process, do a little bit more than what this example wants us to do. This example, we're just trying to find the value c that makes this a perfect square trinomial, so we're going to go all the way down to step 4. I'm going to go a little bit farther and actually factor this into the square of a binomial. Alright, so what we're starting with is x squared minus 7x. Okay? Now, based on this, I'm using the pattern. The pattern, it was x squared plus bx. So for this particular problem, my b is equal to negative 7. Alright, now what I want to do is take b and divide it by 2. So b divided by 2 is going to be negative 7 divided by 2. And again, that's going to help me factor into a square of a binomial in just a few minutes. Now, what I want to do is find that value c. Remember, the value c was equal to b divided by 2 quantity squared. That's equal to c. And so what we're going to do to find that is just say c equals negative 7 divided by 2, that whole thing squared. And what we get then is 49 over 4. If you can't do negative 7 over 2 squared in your head like I can, that's okay, just use your calculator. But it is 49 over 4. So c, that first part of the problem right here, was 49 over 4. So where we're at in the problem is this trinomial becomes x squared minus 7x plus 49 over 4. This is now a perfect square trinomial. Once you complete the square, that's what you make, is a perfect square trinomial. Now, since I have a perfect square trinomial, I can factor this perfect square trinomial into the square of a binomial. I could rewrite it using the factoring pattern. So step 5, we're going to use our factoring pattern, x plus b divided by 2 quantity squared. That's what we're going to factor into. Well, b divided by 2, I go back to step 3, see my star, negative 7/2. So we have x plus negative 7/2 quantity squared. But if I clean that up, positive and negatives are negative. So I have x minus 7/2 squared. So our problem here becomes x minus 7/2 quantity squared. So this is my final answer. And we're going to move on to another example. So we're just going to do the same process, complete the square. What we did in the previous example is we found this value of c, which was step 4, that made a perfect square trinomial. And then we actually went on to step 5, which was factoring that perfect square trinomial into the square of a binomial. We're going to do the exact same thing in this one, just more practice. Okay, this time I don't need to find c. Okay, or at least I'm not told specifically to find c. I'm going to need to find it, but it's not going to be a distinct part of the problem. So here I want to write x squared plus 16x plus 64 as the square of a binomial. Anytime you see that, you need to first make a perfect square trinomial. And what that means is complete the square. And then once we do that, we're going to write it as the square of a binomial. So that means step 5, factor. Okay, so that's kind of the map of what we're going to be doing in this problem. Alright, so to get us started, I'm going to set this equal to 0, x squared plus 16x plus 64. And what I want to do is just set this equal to 0. And I have, my first step was to get x squared plus bx by itself. So I'm going to subtract 64. Okay. So now what I want to do is clean this up. So I have x squared plus 16x plus 64. So I have x squared plus 16x is now equal to negative 64. Okay, now we're ready to get started. So this was step 1. We got x squared plus bx by itself. Again, we're just following the pattern. X squared plus bx. Now we need to figure out what b is. So b equals 16. Okay, the next step was to take b and divide it by 2. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. And again, that's going to help us out in just a minute. Now, in step 4, we're going to take our step 3 and square it. So b divided by 2 squared. B divided by 2 was 8, so we have 8 squared, which is 64. We're going to add this number to both sides of the equation. So what I'm going to do now is say plus 64 on both sides. Okay, and these are going to cancel out, negative 64 and positive 64. So where I'm at is x squared plus 16x plus 64 equals 0. Okay? Now my last step, give myself a little bit more room. My last step is to use the factoring pattern x plus b divided by 2 squared to write this as the square of a binomial. So I'm going to go back to where I saw b divided by 2 in step 3. Again, I put a star next to it, so b divided by 2 is 8. So I have x plus 8 squared, and that's going to be equal to my equation, x squared plus 16x plus 64. So what I've done in this problem is I rewrote this trinomial using completing the square as the square of a binomial. And that's my answer. Okay, one more example in this video. So we've done completing the square twice now. we've broken it down into steps. We're doing the same steps for each example. This time, you might notice that the problem is a little bit different. Before, in the past two examples, I did not have anything in front of x squared. This time I do. It's going to make life a little bit more challenging, but all it is just add one extra little thing to do, so don't freak out. So again, we want to write this as the square of a binomial, so very similar to what we did in the previous example. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is set up our equation. 2x squared minus 12x plus 14 equals 0. We want to start by getting x squared plus bx by itself. I'm going to subtract 14 first. So I have 2x squared minus 12x equals negative 14. Well, I'm looking for x squared plus bx, not 2x squared. So I've got to get rid of this 2 somehow. And the only way to do that is divide everything by 2. To cancel out, so I have x squared minus 6x equals negative 7. Now following the pattern, so this was step 1, get x squared plus bx by itself. I had to do a little extra step to get rid of that 2 in front of my x squared. No big deal. Now what I want to do is figure out what my b is. My b is now negative 6, and I'm just going to keep going with these steps. So step 3 is we take b and divide it by 2. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. And again, that's probably my most important step. It's going to help me out the most at least. So I'm going to put a star next to it. Then step 4, I take b divided by 2 and I square it. So b divided by 2 was negative 3. Then I square it, so I get positive 9. I'm going to add this positive 9 to both sides of my equation. So plus 9, plus 9. So this is where I'm at. X squared minus 6x plus 9 is equal to 2. This x squared minus 6x plus 9 is a perfect square trinomial. I want to write that perfect square trinomial as the square of a binomial. So I have to do my last and final step. So I'm going to use my factoring pattern, x plus b divided by 2 squared. I've already found b divided by 2. It was negative 3. So I have x plus negative 3 squared, which positive and negative is a negative, so let's clean that up. So I have x minus 3 squared. This x minus 3 squared is equal to this trinomial. But this trinomial is equal to 2. So this is my final answer. Okay? The trinomial was equal to 2. This square of a binomial was equal to the trinomial. So by the transitive property just means A is connected to B, B connected to C. So therefore A has to be connected to C. These two have to be equal. And that's it for this video. This might be challenging for you still, even after breaking it down into steps. So this is definitely one you might want to watch multiple times. Let me know if you got questions.